Your doctor has a word for what you have been feeling. He calls it inflammation. He writes it on a form. He hands you something that costs $40 a month, tells you to watch for side effects, and says come back in 6 weeks. And you do. And 6 weeks later you feel roughly the same, maybe a little worse. And he hands you something else. There is a woman in Okinawa who is 103 years old. She has never taken a prescription pill for joint pain. She farms, she gardens, she walks her village without a cane. She does not go to bed wondering if her body is failing her. And every morning, for the last 70 years, she has made the same cup of tea. That tea is what this video is about. Not the idea of it, the actual preparation. What to buy, how much, why the version most people try at home, the capsule, the supplement, the bottle with the impressive label, gives them almost nothing of what she gets from hers every morning. By minute 9, you will have everything you need to start tonight. Her name is Hana Shinjo. She is 103. She lives in Ogimi, a village of roughly 3,000 people on the northern tip of Okinawa. She fills a ceramic kyusu, the kind her mother gave her, the glaze worn thin on the spout from decades of handling, with water heated to just below boiling. She adds half a teaspoon of Uchin. She drops in a pinch of black sesame seeds. She waits. She drinks it before she eats anything else. She has done this more than 10,000 times. She never thought of it as medicine. She thought of it as Tuesday. The herb is called Uchin in Okinawan. In English, you know it as turmeric. In Japanese, ucchin. The specific compound that researchers keep writing papers about is curcumin. That is the bright yellow pigment that stains everything it touches. Your fingers, your cutting board, your white shirt. Hana would tell you that is a sign it is working, that anything with that much color has something to offer. What matters before we get into any of that? She never thought of it as medicine. She thought of it as mourning. And that distinction between something you take because you are already broken and something you do because it is simply Tuesday is the whole difference. You can find dried turmeric powder at almost any grocery store in the United States. Look in the spice aisle, usually near the ginger and cinnamon. A small 2-ounce jar runs between $4 and $7. A 4-ounce jar, which will last you about 2 months at Hana's daily amount, is typically under $10. If you want whole turmeric root, fresher, more aromatic, marginally more potent, check the produce section of an Asian market, a Whole Foods, or sometimes a regular grocery store with a larger produce section. The fresh root looks like a smaller, more slender version of ginger root, with bright orange flesh inside. The dried powder works perfectly. Hana uses dried powder. She has for decades. What you are looking for on the label is just turmeric or turmeric powder, not a supplement, not an extract capsule, not something called curcumin complex or enhanced absorption formula. Just the plain kitchen spice, under $8 a month for the amount Hana uses. That is the entire cost of this practice. Here is how she makes it, and how you should make it too. Heat your water to around 185 degrees Fahrenheit. If you do not have a thermometer, and most people do not, that is the temperature just before a full boil. You will see small bubbles beginning to form at the bottom of the pot, the water moving slightly, but it has not yet broken into a rolling boil. That distinction matters. Boiling water, the full 212 degrees, degrades some of the heat-sensitive compounds in turmeric, just below boiling. Hold it there for a moment, then pour. Add half a teaspoon of turmeric powder directly to your cup. A regular ceramic mug works perfectly well. Pour the hot water over the turmeric slowly. The powder will bloom in the water, turning it that deep golden color, part amber, part yellow. Give it a stir. Now here is the part that most people skip, and it is the single most important instruction in this entire video. Add fat. Hana adds a small pinch of black sesame seeds. The black ones she keeps in a small clay jar near the stove. You can also use half a teaspoon of coconut oil, stirred in while the tea is still hot, or sesame oil, which is what you will find in most Okinawan kitchens. Any fat works. A small amount is all you need, and add a small pinch of ground black pepper as well. Not a dramatic amount, just enough that you can see the specks on the surface of the liquid. Those two additions, fat and black pepper, are the difference between this preparation working for you and producing almost no benefit at all. Curcumin is fat-soluble. This is the chemistry that most turmeric marketing materials quietly skip over. Without fat present in the digestive system at the same time as the curcumin, your gut cannot absorb it effectively. It passes through largely intact, unused. The bioavailability of curcumin consumed without fat sits somewhere in the range of 1 to 5%. Hana's preparation, with its sesame seeds dissolving in the hot liquid, delivers curcumin to the bloodstream at a rate that is orders of magnitude higher. The black pepper is equally important. The compound in black pepper responsible for this is piperine. A study published in 1998 by Shoba and colleagues in the journal Planta Medica found that piperine increases the bioavailability of curcumin by roughly 2,000%. 2,000. That is not a small adjustment. That is the difference between getting the compound and not getting it. Hana has never read that study. She never needed to. Her mother told her to add pepper. Her grandmother told her mother. The pepper was always part of the recipe, the same way salt is always part of cooking. Its purpose so obvious to the person who taught you that it requires no explanation. Optional, a small drizzle of raw honey. Hana sometimes does this in the cooler months, when the mornings are gray and she wants something a little warmer and sweeter. A teaspoon is plenty. Any raw honey works. This addition is comfort, not chemistry, though honey has its own properties that deserve their own video. Drink it with breakfast or immediately after. Not on an empty stomach if you have any tendency toward acid reflux or stomach sensitivity. The turmeric can feel sharp for some people when there is nothing else there. Hana has hers right at the table with miso soup most mornings, sometimes rice with pickled vegetables. The tea is just part of the meal, part of the morning. Before we go any further, a word about who should be careful with this. If you take blood thinners, warfarin, clopidogrel, high-dose aspirin, or anything in that category, please talk to your doctor before adding daily turmeric to your routine. Turmeric has mild anticoagulant properties. That interaction is real, documented, and worth a 5-minute conversation with your physician. If you have gallstones or a history of gallbladder problems, skip this or ask your doctor first. Curcumin stimulates bile production, which can be uncomfortable if your gallbladder is already compromised. If you are pregnant, avoid medicinal quantities of turmeric. If you are on diabetes medications, metformin, insulin, or similar, turmeric can affect blood sugar in ways that may compound what your medication is already doing. Worth mentioning to whoever manages your diabetes care. And if you have chronic GERD or acid reflux, start with a 1/4 teaspoon rather than the full 1/2 teaspoon and see how your stomach responds. For most healthy people over 50 with no active medication concerns, this is safe and well tolerated. The safe daily ceiling researchers typically cite is around 3 grams of curcumin per day. 1/2 teaspoon of turmeric powder contains roughly 1 to 1.5 grams. You are operating well within that range. Now, open your spice drawer if you are somewhere near your kitchen. Right now, while we are talking about this, do you have dried turmeric in there? If yes, you already have half of what you need for tonight. Open it, smell it directly. Fresh turmeric has a warm, slightly peppery, distinctly earthy smell. Part ginger, part something harder to name, almost like good soil after rain. If yours smells like nothing, if the jar is more than 2 years old and the scent has gone flat and dusty, it has lost most of its active compounds. You will want a fresh jar. Fresh is what does the work. Your full grocery list, dried turmeric powder, black pepper, and any fat such as black sesame seeds, coconut oil, or sesame oil. 3 items, under $8 for the month, often under $5 if you already have the pepper and a cooking oil. Hana buys her Uchin at the market in Ogimi. The farmers there have been growing it in the same volcanic soil for longer than anyone can specifically remember. The roots come up bright orange inside, the color almost startling. She dries the slices herself sometimes, though she has also bought the powder from the same vendor for 30 years. Now let me tell you about something that I think explains why so many people have tried turmeric and felt nothing. Honestly, when I first started digging into the research on this, I expected the usual picture: a few promising studies, a lot of industry-funded noise, inconclusive conclusions. That is what I find with most things in this space. So I was genuinely not prepared for what Xi'an University published in 2023. They recruited 539 participants, real people with real inflammatory conditions, not rats in a lab, and measured what happened to their C-reactive protein levels after consistent curcumin supplementation. CRP is the inflammation marker your doctor looks at in a standard blood panel. When it is high, it means something is actively inflaming the body. When it comes down, that process is quieting. After the intervention, CRP dropped by an average of 0.93 units. The p-value on that finding was less than 0.0001, which in research language means the probability that this was a coincidence is essentially zero. Pain scores dropped by more than 5 points. These were not people who had made wholesale lifestyle changes. They were not running marathons or eliminating processed food. They were taking curcumin consistently in a bioavailable form. That is it. But here is the key word: bioavailable. The participants were not drinking plain turmeric water with no fat. The preparation method matters enormously, and this is where most people's home experiments fail before they start. Wait, I want to be careful here, because I do not want to overstate this. The research is clear on the mechanism and on the direction of effect. It is less clear on the individual variation. Some people feel a difference in weeks, others take months. Some people with very aggressive inflammatory conditions will need more than a morning cup of tea. The grandmother is not a prescription, she is an example. But the example is real, the mechanism is documented, and the cost of trying it for 60 days is under $10. A review published in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences in 2021 looked at the molecular mechanism in detail. Curcumin works by inhibiting something called the NF-κB pathway. Think of NF-κB as the master switch for inflammation in the body. When that switch is activated, by stress, by injury, by processed food, by 100 different triggers, it sends a signal that launches a cascade of pro-inflammatory compounds. Joints swell, tissue aches. The body is doing exactly what it evolved to do, but in modern life it is often doing it in response to triggers that never existed during most of human evolution. Curcumin turns that switch down, not off entirely. Your inflammatory response needs to exist, but down. The researchers described it as modulating the pathway, not eliminating it. Hana's joints have been operating in a different inflammatory environment than most people's for 7 decades. That does not happen by accident. Here is what Hana would have found baffling about the way most Americans approach this. They buy a capsule. They take it with water. They feel nothing. They conclude turmeric does not work. And they are right, not because the compound does not work, but because the preparation delivers almost none of it to the bloodstream. 95% passes through. The capsule company made money. The person got nothing. And the grandmother in Ogimi, who solved this problem 70 years ago with a pinch of sesame seeds, did not have a label on her jar, and did not need one. The most common mistake people make when they try turmeric at home is the plainness of it. Turmeric in hot water, maybe some honey, nothing else. It tastes fine. It feels intentional. And then 3 weeks later, they feel no different, and the jar goes back in the drawer. And that is the end of the experiment. The fat and the pepper are not optional enhancements. They are the protocol. Without them, you are doing something that looks like what Hana does, but produces a fraction of the result. Hana was born in 1923. The Okinawa she was born into was an agricultural society. The vast majority of the population grew something, tended something, harvested something. Her mother farmed. Her grandmother farmed before that. The turmeric tea was not a remedy she discovered in middle age when a joint started to hurt. It was simply part of mourning. You learned it by watching, not by being taught. Her mother made it. Hana stood next to her in the kitchen as a small girl and watched the same hands do the same thing in the same order every day. There was no instruction. There was just mourning, and the tea was part of it. She has 1 daughter and 3 grandchildren. They visit often. Her daughter lives nearby and comes most mornings. Her grandchildren less frequently, as they have settled in Naha and one in Tokyo. When they visit, Hana makes the tea for all of them without asking whether they want it. She puts the cups on the table. The grandchildren drink it without thinking much about it, the way you drink whatever is in front of you when you are visiting someone's home. They know the tea. They grew up with it. Whether they make it for themselves at home is another question. Her daughter, who is 74, still makes it most mornings. The grandchildren are less consistent. Hana does not lecture them about it. She does not explain what it is doing for their joints or their gut or their inflammatory pathways. She just makes it, and when they are there, she hands them the cup the way you hand someone a piece of fruit because it is ripe and it would be a shame to waste it. There is something worth sitting with for a moment because it is directly relevant to what we are talking about. In 1960, Okinawa had the highest longevity statistics in Japan, and Japan already had some of the highest longevity rates in the world. The dietary patterns there were distinctive, even by Japanese standards. Extremely high vegetable intake, very low fat intake, below 7% of total dietary calories compared to the American average of more than 30%. Regular consumption of fermented foods, bitter melon, sweet potato, and significant amounts of Uchin in various preparations. This was not a population that had adopted these habits recently. These patterns had been stable for generations. Then things changed, and they changed quickly. After World War II, the United States military established a substantial presence in Okinawa. American fast food followed. Vending machines, processed snacks, high-calorie, low-nutrient food that was novel and accessible and cheap. By the 1970s and 1980s, particularly among younger Okinawans, the traditional dietary patterns were eroding. Fat intake rose from under 7% of calories to nearly 27% within a couple of decades. The morning tea, the Uchin, the miso, the bitter melon started to be replaced by coffee and convenience food. Not by everyone, not all at once, but the direction of change was clear. By the year 2000, Okinawan men had dropped from the top of Japan's longevity rankings to 26th among Japan's 47 prefectures. 26th, from 1st to 26th within roughly one generation. The women's rankings held better, partly because the dietary shift happened more slowly among older women who maintained traditional practices. But the trend was visible, and the researchers who studied it were not uncertain about the cause. The generation that stopped drinking ucchin-cha, that replaced the fermented breakfast with something from a vending machine, that traded the garden in Ogimi for a McDonald's on the highway south. That generation was now dealing with the chronic conditions their parents and grandparents had largely managed to avoid. Hana watched this happen. She kept making her tea, not as a protest, not as a statement about tradition versus modernity. She kept making it because it was morning, and that is what morning meant. She is not sentimental about it in the way that sometimes gets attached to these stories. She does not speak about the old ways with nostalgia or longing. She speaks about the tea the way she speaks about breakfast, practically, specifically, without ceremony. The ceremony is in the doing. The cup every morning is the ceremony. Now, back to Hana. What her morning practice actually is, beneath the comfortable routine of it, is a system that reinforces itself. She drinks the tea before eating. She eats breakfast, miso soup most mornings, which is itself a fermented food, sometimes rice with pickled vegetables, occasionally a small piece of fish. She works in her garden for an hour or two in the late morning, moving at her own pace, bending, carrying, standing in the sun. She eats lightly in the afternoon. She is asleep early. She has been doing this for 7 decades. The tea is not separate from that system. It is threaded through it. The turmeric tea, absorbed with the fat from the sesame seeds, begins lowering the inflammatory baseline before the first full meal of the day. The miso at breakfast introduces lactobacillus and other beneficial bacteria to a gut that the curcumin is simultaneously making more hospitable to those same bacteria. The movement in the garden activates the lymphatic system, which, unlike the cardiovascular system, has no pump of its own and depends entirely on physical movement to circulate. The early bedtime protects the hormonal repair cycles, particularly human growth hormone. that are most active in the first hours of deep sleep. The grandmother never thought of it as a protocol. She thought of it as how you live. A review published in 2025 in Frontiers in Aging Neuroscience looked specifically at what curcumin does to the cellular aging process. The researchers found that it modulates two proteins, AMPK and SIRT1, that are central to cellular energy regulation and longevity signaling. AMPK is often called the body's fuel gauge. When it is properly activated, cells manage energy more efficiently and are better at clearing debris. SIRT1 is involved in DNA repair and in regulating the inflammatory response of aging cells. The review also found that curcumin reduces what researchers call SASP, the senescence-associated secretory phenotype. That is the tendency of old, damaged cells to secrete pro-inflammatory compounds, even when they are no longer doing useful work. Hana's tea is not just addressing the joint that aches in the morning. It is operating at a cellular level that the grandmother could not have named, but that she seems to have known existed. The gut microbiome research from 2025 found something complementary. Consistent curcumin intake increased populations of bifidobacterium and lactobacillus, the beneficial bacterial families that support digestion, regulate the immune response, and even influence mood and energy through the gut-brain axis, while simultaneously reducing populations of pathogenic bacteria. Hana's gut microbiome, built over 7 decades of daily curcumin tea and fermented miso and fresh vegetables, is almost certainly a different biological ecosystem than the gut of someone who has spent those same years eating differently. That difference has consequences for everything: how she absorbs nutrients, how she responds to immune challenges, how she feels in the morning. The research is still catching up to what she knew. That is just an accurate description of the timeline. A Kyoto University study from 2005, which systematically tested 138 food items commonly consumed in Okinawa for anti-inflammatory activity, found wild turmeric among the highest-performing items in the entire sample. The researchers arrived at the village markets with their instruments and their analytical protocols, and the thing the grandmothers had been putting in their tea for generations turned out to be near the top of the list. That tends to happen when you test what centenarian grandmothers actually eat. I want to ask you something before we talk about what to expect when you start. Not a rhetorical question. An actual one I would like you to sit with for a moment. What did someone in your own family make when you were not feeling well? Not what you do now. What did someone older make when you were a child or a teenager and something was wrong? A tea, a broth, something rubbed on your chest or pressed against your forehead. Something with a particular smell: ginger, eucalyptus, camphor. Something you still associate with being sick and being cared for. Something that seemed to have a logic behind it, even if no one explained the logic out loud. Whatever it was, that knowledge came from somewhere. Someone's grandmother learned it from someone else's grandmother. It traveled through families and through generations without being written down, without being clinically validated, without anyone needing to justify it, because it simply worked. And there is a good chance that the underlying mechanism, whatever the preparation was actually doing in the body, was something measurable, something that a researcher in 2025 could identify and name. That is the whole project of the Lost Dispensary. Not the romance of old ways, not the idea that traditional knowledge is automatically superior to modern medicine. It is not, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you something. The project is simpler and more specific, to look at what the grandmothers in the longest-lived communities actually did, to document the preparations, to cross-reference them against the available research, and to deliver the ones that hold up. Hana's tea holds up. Here is what you might notice if you start making it in the mornings. In the first 72 hours, probably nothing you could name. That is not a failure. Curcumin does not work like a pain reliever. It does not produce an effect within the hour and then wear off. It works through accumulation and through the gradual modulation of pathways that took years to get where they are. The NFKB switch does not reset in 3 days. You are not treating an acute problem. You are changing a baseline. Those are different timelines. By the second week, after 10 or 12 cups, if you have been consistent, And if your preparation includes the fat and the pepper, some people notice something that is difficult to describe precisely. Not a dramatic reduction in pain, more like the absence of something that had been present so long they stopped noticing it. A joint that felt stiff for the first hour of the day starts loosening 15 minutes earlier. A kind of low-grade morning tension, the physical version of starting the day already behind, begins to lift a bit sooner, or nothing perceptible at all, which is also fine and not a reason to stop. Continue. At 30 days, if you have been consistent, the research suggests that measurable changes in inflammatory markers would be visible in a blood test, specifically in CRP, the marker from the Xianjiaotong study. You will probably not feel this directly. The change is happening below the level of sensation, but it is happening. At 90 days, the habit has become automatic. You make the tea before you have fully decided to make the tea. Your hand reaches for the turmeric the way your hand reaches for the coffee. The cup is in your hand and you are standing by the window and the steam is rising and you are doing the thing that morning requires. That is the day the grandmother lives. The day you forget, it counts as medicine. Hana never measured a thing. She knew the right amount because she had made it 10,000 times. She knew the right temperature because she had watched the water long enough to know what it looked like when it was ready. She knew when the cup was ready because she knew the color and the smell. You will find your version of that knowing too. It starts with 1 cup. It compounds over Tuesday after Tuesday after Tuesday. What you do tonight, if you have turmeric in the house, is heat water just below boiling. Pour it over half a teaspoon of turmeric powder, add your pinch of black pepper, add your fat, stir it, and put it somewhere you will see it tomorrow morning. Let tomorrow morning be the first morning. If you do not have turmeric at home, write it on whatever list you keep and buy it this week. Under $8. Every grocery store carries it. Subscribe to the Lost Dispensary. Every week, 1 culture, 1 remedy, 1 preparation you can start tonight. Leave a comment below and tell me, what did your grandmother make when someone in the family was not feeling well? I want to know where the recipe came from, whether anyone still makes it, what it smelled like. She never called it medicine. She called it morning.